Wyoming has world-class energy resources and world-class wildlife resources. And, that nexus where sometimes populations of animals overlap the energy resources it's real critical because, our state economy is based on both those aspects too, on energy resources and then tourism. And so, people want to have both, and we're trying to understand how we can make that a little bit more possible through research findings. My name is Jeff Beck. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management at the University of Wyoming. My research focus is on wildlife habitat and restoration ecology of disturbed wildlife habitats. I have kind of three focal areas that my lab concentrates on in our research. One of those areas is understanding the impacts of energy development and mining on wildlife populations. Another focus of our research is on habitat treatment, which is sometimes used as mitigation for impacts, also with an idea to enhance attributes of habitats. And then a third area that we focus on is assessing and monitoring wildlife habitat, which is a really fundamental part of understanding if restorative efforts are successful with wildlife populations. And I would also add that probably a lot of what we focus on tend to be species that inhabit sagebrush ecosystems within the Intermountain West, and particularly here in Wyoming. Some of the species I study are the greater sage-grouse. We also do some work with ungulates, including elk, pronghorn, and bighorn sheep. Managing wildlife species in large landscapes is very complex, and our state is fortunate that we still have relatively open landscapes that animals migrate across and access seasonal resources. So in terms of research, how do we incorporate that information that animals do use vast habitats and they encounter seasonal conditions, weather patterns, differences in, even on a year-to-year basis in, say, forage quantity and quality. In our research, those are all things that we consider based on the species and what the question is. Some of our studies are focused on particular life stages of animals, and so we design the studies to answer those kinds of questions. But on the other hand, there's other studies like our work with sage-grouse migration, where we're looking at it on a year-round basis. And our elk study, we also have been evaluating elk selection on a year-round basis and even on a daily basis as well. So there's lots of scales that occur in our studies, both in time and also in space, to try to address those questions, because we know animals use habitat at different times, different amounts of habitat for different reasons. And so knowing all that, we actually really carefully look at the ecological importance of different time and space scales to try to answer the questions that we are working with. For the future, some things that we need to know more about are information we can only get from longer-term studies. So a lot of the graduate student studies that are conducted might have a 2 or 3 year lifespan for a project where we collect data, some specific questions for 2 or 3 years. But something that I'm really interested in is longer-term studies where we can ask questions that kind of delve into more population level effect for animals that live for a long time, for instance. So when we have longer-term data sets, we can ask those kinds of questions. And I think as the technology continues to develop, we'll be integrating more technological advancements into our research to ask questions that we couldn't ask before. One of my students has been recording sound in one of the energy fields, and that's a new area too that's really interesting, because sound interferes with communication with animals and it changes their behavior, and so that may be something that in the future we can manipulate to help animals to cope with disturbances better. One of the major questions that is still out there is, once energy development is complete and the resources are extracted, could we actually restore a fulfilled landscape that has been developed and all the resources extracted, can we go back in and will the wildlife respond to a change that has occurred after the infrastructure is no longer functioning and soils are reclaimed, the vegetation hopefully has been reestablished, and that's one of those interesting questions for the future that needs to be asked, something I want to do, that I'm actually looking at options to pursue. My motivation for continuing my research is to ask more and more complex questions, because we kind of build a base of information, and then once we have that base of information, it causes us to create new hypotheses about what things may really mean. And one of the interesting aspects, for instance, is the mechanisms that maybe cause animals to avoid areas. So we have measured traffic volumes, we've measured sound, and those are some of the kind of newer pioneering kind of aspects about this impact research. You know, we can find out some questions we never asked before and get at the heart of why maybe animals do what they do in response to disturbance. And so, you know, it's very exciting. You know, it's very interesting to uncover new things that we never knew. But really, you know, to promote science, we have to continue to ask more and more complex questions and build upon what we've already learned. It's this process that I think every scientist undergoes.